Alright, welcome back to differential reinforcement. This is video part 2, and here are the objectives. Describe antecedent stimuli by provenance. Describe differential reinforcement. List the two essential components of differential reinforcement. You'll be able to list variable features of differential reinforcement. State the effect of differential reinforcement based on antecedent stimuli. Use Jack Michael's terms to describe the effects of differential reinforcement on antecedent stimuli. And identify the relationships between SD and S delta and reinforcement. So objective 7 is to describe operant antecedent stimuli by provenance. Operant antecedent stimuli are due to ontogenic provenance. That is, their effects are acquired through experience. When we're talking about operant antecedent stimuli, what I'm referring to are SDs and S deltas. They're due to a history of differential reinforcement or punishment. That's the ontogenic provenance that I'm referring to. Alright, objective number 8 is to describe differential reinforcement. Then 9 is list the two essential components of differential reinforcement. And 10 is to list variable features of differential reinforcement. Differential reinforcement is a procedure or an operation consisting of reinforcement and extinction. Either a response is reinforced and another response is extinguished. Think topography. So either one topography produces the reinforcer or another topography does not produce a reinforcer. Or, in the presence of one stimulus, a response will produce a reinforcer. In the absence of that stimulus, the response will not produce the reinforcer. Now, differential reinforcement has two effects, but the effects depend on whether reinforcement is based on response properties or stimulus properties. When differential reinforcement is based on response properties, it produces response differentiation. So the contingency that describes response differentiation is an RS contingency, response consequence. Okay, so in other words, when one or more responses produce a reinforcer and others don't, the responses that do produce the reinforcer increase in probability in the future, while the others decrease in probability in the future. That outcome is called response differentiation. The example of the kid in the cookie jar and mom is an example of response differentiation, where a variety of topographies in week 1 were producing cookies, but by, I think it was the last week before intervention, maybe it was like week 5, only yelling was occurring. The RS contingency of cookie getting behavior and access to cookies produced response differentiation by making cookies occur or making cookies more likely to occur after yelling than other topographies of behavior. Now, when differential reinforcement is based on stimulus properties, it produces stimulus discrimination. So stimulus discrimination is described by an SRS contingency. Differential reinforcement may be based on both stimulus properties and response properties. We don't have a name for the outcome. So the two critical components of differential reinforcement are reinforcement and extinction. And there are variable features of differential reinforcement. So some differential reinforcement procedures may deliver the reinforcer contingent on response properties, or reinforcement may be based on response properties. Some differential reinforcement procedures, the reinforcement may be based on stimulus properties. Some differential reinforcement procedures may strengthen alternative responses. That's known as DRA, or differential reinforcement of alternative responding. It may strengthen incompatible responses. That's DRI, differential reinforcement of incompatible responses. May be used to teach new responses. In other words, give an individual a new skill. May be used to reinforce other behavior. That's used to refer to, or that's referred to as DRO. Sometimes folks say differential reinforcement of other behavior, but really the reinforcer isn't delivered contingent on behavior in a DRO. In a DRO, if the behavior doesn't occur for a predetermined period of time, then the reinforcer is delivered. So it's more precisely referred to as differential reinforcement of response omission. Some differential reinforcement procedures may be used to reinforce low rates of behavior. Differential reinforcement of low rates, or DRL. And some may be used to establish new forms of stimulus control over behavior. Okay, so when reinforcement is based on response properties, it can strengthen alternative responses, strengthen incompatible responses, teach new responses, reinforce other behavior, reinforce low rates of behavior. But when reinforcement is based on stimulus properties, it can be used to establish new forms of stimulus control over behavior. Alright, objective 11, state the effect of differential reinforcement based on antecedent stimuli. 12, use Jack Michael's term to describe the effect of differential reinforcement on antecedent stimuli. 13, identify the relationships between SD and S delta and reinforcement. Well, when differential reinforcement is based on stimulus properties, it has a function altering effect on antecedent stimuli. So far when I have talked about differential reinforcement based on stimulus properties, in which in the presence of one antecedent the response occurs and it's reinforced, and in the absence of that antecedent, if the response occurs, it's not reinforced. There's reinforcement and extinction are two defining features. What I haven't said yet, but I'm saying now, is that that procedure, differential reinforcement, has a function altering effect on those antecedent stimuli, such that one becomes an SD, the one correlated with availability of reinforcement. The other is an S delta, correlated with the unavailability or the absence of reinforcement. So the SD acquires an evocative effect on the behavior. S delta acquires an abative effect on the behavior. Those functions were acquired through differential reinforcement based on operant selection. So the stimulus correlated with reinforcement acquires evocative properties. The stimulus becomes an SD. It's pronounced SD. And the SD is due to a correlation with the availability of reinforcement for responding. That's because in the past, in the presence of that stimulus, the reinforcer was produced by the behavior. And in the absence of that stimulus, the reinforcer was not produced by the behavior, or it was far less likely. The stimulus correlated with extinction acquires abative properties. So this stimulus becomes an S delta. It's pronounced S delta. That's because in the past, in the presence of this S delta, or this stimulus before was an S delta, if the response occurred, the reinforcer was not produced or did not occur. This is an extinction condition. The reinforcer is withheld if the behavior occurs in the presence of this stimulus, this S delta. Well, the SD is said to have discriminative stimulus control over responding. The free operant, described by an RS contingency, becomes a discriminated operant, described by an SRS contingency. All as a result of differential reinforcement based on stimulus properties. So the SD evokes or abates behavior depending on a history of reinforcement or punishment in the presence but not the absence of the antecedent. And I don't think we're going to get into it at the moment here, the details about whether the SD evokes or abates the behavior depending on reinforcement or punishment. Because for example, an SD for reinforcement evokes the behavior that produces the reinforcer, but an SD for punishment abates the behavior that produced the punisher in the past. But we're not going to get into detail on that yet. Okay, let me give you an example, a visual depiction of this procedure. So pretend, I think we're going to have, a rat pressing a lever for food pellets in an operant chamber. And you present a light in the box, and when the light is on, if the rat presses the lever, it produces a food pellet. There's our SRS contingency. Alternatively, in the condition where the light is off, if the rat presses the lever, it does not produce a food pellet. That's another SRS contingency. But different consequences for the behavior under in the presence of different stimuli has a function altering effect on those stimuli. So differential reinforcement here turns light on into an SD, and it turns light off into an S delta. That's the function altering effect of differential reinforcement. Now the light on and light off have new functions. The light off is an S delta, it abates lever pressing. Light on is an SD, it evokes lever pressing. And they have those effects due to their history of differential reinforcement and their correlation with the availability or unavailability of food for lever pressing. So ASR number 11. The two critical components of differential reinforcement are A, response differentiation and extinction, B, stimulus discrimination and stimulus control, C, reinforcement and extinction, or D, differential reinforcement and pairing. A couple more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll. And the answer is C, reinforcement and extinction. ASR 12, when differential reinforcement is based on antecedents, the outcome is A, response differentiation, or B, stimulus discrimination. Give you a few more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer is B, stimulus discrimination. When differential reinforcement is based on response properties, the outcome is response differentiation. ASR 13. Which antecedent is correlated with the availability of reinforcement for responding? Is it A, SD, or B, S delta? Give you a few seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. Answer is A, SD. ASR 14. SDs are due to A, a history of stimulus-stimulus pairing, B, the current available reinforcer, C, the expectation that behavior will be reinforced, or D, a history of differential reinforcement or punishment. A few more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. And the answer is D, a history of differential reinforcement or punishment. Note that the expectation that a behavior will be reinforced is a mentalistic explanation. It will be more commonly employed in psychology or neuroscience or cognitive psychology. Alright, this is where we would normally take a cell phone break in class. We're going to skip it, of course. Oh, and here are our next objectives. So that concludes video part 2 of differential reinforcement. See you later at part 3.